A good day to all. I hope all to be good and to be doing the most in ensuring practice. So remember that to get better at this mathematics, you need to practice continuously. So now, gents, to continue with our hyperbola function, I want us to now attempt in sketching the function itself. So now remember that this is the function. So that would be the hyperbola function of the form y equals a divided by x plus p plus q. So now to sketch the function, you would need to firstly determine the y-intercept, and you do so by letting x to equal 0 and then solve for y. You would then also need to determine the x-intercept. So you would then just need to let y to equal 0 so that you solve for x. You would then also need to identify the asymptotes. So remember that an asymptote would be a number or a point that the graph itself cannot pass. So now the asymptote that you would have here would be the horizontal asymptote. So that would be the horizontal asymptote, which would just be y equals q. So that would be this q over there. You would also have the x equals the negative p with respect to what we actually have there. So now remember that the asymptote is a number that you cannot obtain in that function. So now the vertical asymptote, so remember that you actually need to equate the denominator to 0, then solve for x. So this would then just be the negative p. So now I want us to try to sketch the function. I've prepared a few questions here for us to go through with it. So now we've been given the hyperbola function, y equals 2 divided by x plus 4 minus 1. So the first question, 1.1, wants us to write down the equations of the asymptotes. So again, as we deduced in the previous page, the asymptotes would be the horizontal asymptote. So that would be 1.1 over there. This would be the horizontal asymptote. I'll just write it as HA, which would just be y equals negative 1. So in this function over here, y cannot equal negative 1. The vertical asymptote would then just be the, it's essentially you solving for x after you've equated the denominator to 0. So you would then end up with x equals negative 4. So your vertical asymptote would equal negative 4. So now that was 1.1. Let's move on to 1.2, which wants us to determine the x-intercept. So this is a 3-mark question. So I'll just move on to the next page for us to be able to do so. So I'll also just write out the question as well. So let me just maybe use the red marker there, 1.2. So this would be y equals, so I think this was a 2 divided by x plus 4 minus 1. So just going back to the question, so it wants us to determine the x-intercept. X-intercept, we would need to let the y to equal 0. So that's y equaling 0 over there. And we would then need to solve for x. To do so, we would move the negative 1 to the left-hand side. and we would then cross multiply. So remember that this would be just over 1. Cross multiply, we will have in x plus 4, which would equal 2. Therefore, x would equal -2. So the coordinates of the x-intercept would be -2 is to 0. So now that was 1.2, which wanted us to find the x-intercept. So now let's move on to the y-intercept. So that would be 1.3. Determine the y-intercept. For the y-intercept, we would need to let the x to equal 0. So that would be y equals 2 divided by, where there is x, we would sub in a 0, and we would then just have that. So now this in itself would simplify to a 2 divided by 4 minus 1, which further simplifies to a -1/2. The coordinates of the y-intercept will then read as follows. So now this would be 0 is to -1/2. So now again, we only ever needed we needed to identify the asymptotes. We needed to determine the x-intercept as well as the y-intercept, which is what which we have done. So we can then now be able to sketch the function. So 1.4 wants us to go on ahead and sketch the function. So let's do so. So I'll just move on to the next page for that. So I'll just write on the side. So that would be all the points we managed to get. So we got the x equals -4 as well as y equals -1. So remember that these were the asymptotes, the vertical as well as the horizontal. We also got the -2 is to 0 as the x-intercept, as well as the 0 is to -1/2 as the y-intercept. So now to sketch the function, we would need to identify the intercept. So that would be the x-intercept there, and this would be the y-intercept. We then just need to make sure that we don't touch the axis. So we already have the asymptotes drawn in. So we can then just make sure that we get to the asymptotes as much as we possibly can without necessarily touching them. We would also have the same thing on this side of the asymptotes. So it needs to be as close to the asymptote as possible. And this in itself would be the graph of y equals 2 divided by x plus 4 minus 1. So now, gents, that is how you sketch a hyperbola function. Please do go over the vid and attempt the work that does follow. A good day to all.